Okay, welcome everyone. So we are here today with Mildred Janzen, and we are going to have some Q&A questions about her book, Surviving Hitler and Evading Stalin. So the peaceful farm life of a teenage girl in Germany is abruptly upended when World War II comes knocking at her family's door. 1 month before her 16th birthday, Mildred Schindler and her family are captured by Russian soldiers. Having already survived life in Hitler's Nazi Germany, they are now faced with a new terror of a new enemy, Stalin's Red Army. Driven from their home, Mildred and her family become refugees, along with a sad, slow-moving caravan of other families who have suffered the same fate. Cleverly disguised by her mother, Mildred avoids being taken to a work camp until one morning when authorities arrive unexpectedly. Her family has already been taken by Russian soldiers, and now she is taken from her mother and brother. Mildred recounts in meticulous detail her treacherous journey and the roller coaster of raw emotions she experiences: fear, regret, loneliness, humility, perseverance, and defiance. Mildred's odyssey of making her way home and finding her family in a war-torn countryside take many riveting twists and turns. The discovery of a secret hidden document offers hope for a brighter future. From harrowing to heartwarming, this memoir provides a unique perspective of a Gentile girl's road to resilience and her fortitude against all odds to forge a life filled with love and laughter. Surviving Hitler, Evading Stalin is a remarkable testimony to the strength of the unconquerable human spirit and an enduring amount of God's faithfulness in the midst of a faithless circumstances. I am pleased to present Mildred and her daughter, Susan. Before we begin with kind of the Q&A discussion portion of the event, Susan would like to speak about some upcoming projects that they all have in the works. Susan?
Thank you. Just a quick announcement. There are 2 new additions to the original edition of this book that have just come out earlier this year. A faith-based edition that has questions at the end of each chapter and a 12-part Bible study, and an education edition, which we're very interested in getting into schools, that also has questions and a lesson plan for teachers and so forth. So we just wanted you to know about that, and also there's a 20-minute short documentary that's been made of this story. It is currently in film festivals, entered in film festivals for awards, and so it can't be out in public view, but as soon as that is released, we'll have an announcement on the book's Facebook page, and you'll all be able to look at that. But you have the opportunity to hear from Mother firsthand today, so we appreciate the opportunity to be here, and make sure to sign the book that's on the round table out there if you didn't get to do that before. We always like, Mom loves to look back to see who has come to her event. So with that, I will turn it back. Oh, and I want to introduce my sister, Karen Van Allen. She's also here. She's the one that brought Mom this morning. And Chris. Oh, and Chris Janzen. Chris was integral in helping write the book and collect information from, he's been over to Germany and visited our relatives over there. So thank you for coming, Chris.
Okay. Well, Mildred, I so greatly appreciate you coming here today. I think Susan and I contacted you last fall, and after the president of our Friends in the Library, who I believe you're friends with Cindy, she recommended this book and said, you just have to read it, you have to have it in your collection. And I read the book, and for any of you in the audience who has not read this book, I highly recommend it. It's just such a unique perspective. You know, a story of someone who experienced World War II firsthand, and I highly recommend that you guys check it out today or purchase a copy at the end. So first off, Mildred, what motivated you to write this book?
Well, first of all, I am so happy to be here and share with you today. I did not want to write a book. I wanted to write it down louder. Louder. What am I going?
No, just speak louder.
Am I going to be able to speak louder?
There we go. We'll do this. I'll fly.
Oh, no, I'm really on. When I was 88 years old, I thought, I got to write this down for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren before I forget what happened, when it happened. And so I took a yellow tablet and I started writing, had about 10 pages. And then this came about. A relative of ours went to Germany, and she met this lady who has written several, I don't know how many books you read, three books she had written, and she met her and she said, I think you would be interested in meeting my relative, and because she has a story that you might be interested. So Susan and Karen, my two daughters, said, oh, Mom, we've got to do this. And I said, no, we don't. I don't want to do this. And then they finally persuaded me to do this. And that's how it came about. I wanted to just, and I am so glad I did, because I've been to several schools, and that's where I want to be, talking to those children, 7th, 8th graders, 5th and 6th graders. I want to get into those schools. Those are my favorite places to go to speak.
And I love to hear that as someone who majored in history. I was telling Mildred how incredibly important it is to remember these events and don't forget, because history can sometimes repeat itself. So I really appreciate hearing that. So this book is incredibly personal. You go there with a lot of different topics and your experiences and the horrors that you saw. Was it hard to remember and relive that experience, that time in your life?
It was very hard. It was very hard to go through all that. I would have dreams because you go over it and over it again. So that was the hard part of it, because you relive it again. And that was hard. I would be dreaming. And that was the hard part, yes. So how did you and Sherry, the writer, who actually, so this is Mildred's story, but she had a writer who, I believe I heard you say, Susan, is a history teacher as well. How did you guys get connected so that this whole project could come to be? Because this is pretty recently published, I believe 2020. So how during COVID times or before COVID times, how did you guys meet and write this book? Well, Sherry came from Mississippi for 3 days and stayed with the lady that she met in Germany, in Lyons. And then every day she would come to my house, and we'd sit at the dining room table. She'd sit on one side, I'd sit on the other, and she would just ask questions, and I would answer them. And she just kept it talking and kept it talking, and she made me feel so comfortable. I did not want to do that, so when she first came, I said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. But the more we talked, she made me feel so comfortable. She didn't pressure me. She just asked questions, and I answered. And by the second day, I said, you could be one of my daughters. I think I adopt you. And so I have an adopted daughter by Sherry.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
How long did it take you?
It's about 4 months.
By March, she said, I'm going to have this done by March.
And that was in October.
Yes, yes.
So about 4 months. That's great. So in the book, like I said, there's so many things you talk about, from your family going through living under the reign of Hitler, to the invasion of the Red Army, and soldiers coming to your farm, and you guys, it seemed like you would get a little bit of help and then it would just be squashed, and then you would rebuild, and then it would be, you know, torn away. So what was the hardest part of the book for you to describe?
I would say, Susan, what do you think?
Well, we talked about the bread making was kind of a hard thing to describe.
Oh yes, from my mother. She wanted me to describe how mother baked bread. Well, she baked these big loaves of bread in an oven that she had the big long spatula and put it in there in the oven, about 10 loaves at a time. And that to me was the hardest thing to describe in a book. But the hard part was that when first we were under Hitler, you could not say what you wanted to say. Of course, we as children didn't know very much. My folks did, but all you knew is what you were told over the radio. What Hitler wanted you to know, you could not say anything. My dad was here for 8 years in the States and my mother for 3. And they were watching my dad because he had been in America. And he was a farmer in a small place, like our village was 600. And they were watching him, and every time he'd go to a meeting, my mother would say, Papa, don't say anything. Just don't express what you feel. Don't say anything, because she was afraid he wouldn't come home if he did. And that, things like that. And then they tried to take Hitler's life several times, and all we had was a radio on the stand. And he comes in, my dad, he bends over the radio, and I could hear him say, they missed him again. They missed him again. That, in other words, they didn't get him. They wanted to get rid of him. He always finished his speech short or something, and then he was gone before the bomb went off, and so he would say they missed him again. And that's all I can remember as a child, because they did not talk to us about things. I was, of course, and myself, we did not know what was going on. We lived out in the country. All we had was the radio, so we knew exactly. We had Hitler picture hanging in our school, and we had to have the Heil Hitler when we, in the mornings, instead of having prayer, you have the Heil Hitler, and that's how it went in schools. And now I don't know what the question was. The hardest part. Well, just, I don't know. It all was hard. Let's put it that way. Every bit of it. And then after the book was finished, I had to go through each chapter 4 times. I said to the girls, oh, not again. Here come a pile from the publisher. You've got to go through this again. I want to make sure, they want to make sure this is what you said. And then I would mark, oh no, this is not what I said. And then I marked it. So they wanted to make sure it was right, that it was something that I didn't say. And I was still able to do that, and I'm so grateful that I could remember and do all this to get it all together, because I was afraid at age 88. Now I'm 94, and I'm still remembering a few things.
Well, that actually brings up a very good point, because Mildred is 94. Doesn't she look great for 94? So you were very, very young when this was all occurring. So you were a child going through some very serious experiences. I specifically remember a part in the book early on that really stood out to me, and you talked about your experience when you guys, because you lived on a farm out in the country, but you still would go into town to do, your buying and shopping and whatnot, and how there was a Jewish family that you would always go to, and you had such a great experience, and you talked about years prior and how great it was to see them, but then one year you went in, and they were gone.
Yes, yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, we would go to shop. That was a store. The Jewish people they were good merchants. Everywhere in the next town we went with horse and wagon to go, or by bicycles, we go to Russen to shop. And when we get there in the winter time, my dad and mom shop, they take us in the back room and give us warm, hot milk and with honey and bread. We have butter bread or jelly bread. They give us something in the back while my folks were shopping. And then when my dad went in one time into town, and he said to my mother, "You can't believe what I just saw. The windows are broken, the store windows are broken, the clothes are on the streets of the merchants, and shoes are on the streets. Everything's on the streets. There is nobody around." That's all we knew. I didn't know what happened to the Jews till I came over here. We did not know that there were camps there, Dachau and all that. And when we were in Germany, I said to my husband, "I'm not going there to see that. I was part of that. I was there when that happened. I'm not going to go see that." I just couldn't imagine. And I did not know about this till I came over here. That's how quiet Hitler kept things from us. And my brother was 13 years old. And I did not know, when we went in, I have to tell you this story. When we went over there in the 70s, Leon took me over there to visit friends and relatives. And he got classmates of mine and friends of ours from our hometown together for the day. And we had coffee cake and all this coffee kuchen and all and coffee, and she entertained us for the whole day. And he said, "Did Horst ever tell you the story? After the Russians were there about 3 days, 4 of us stood around, 2 13-year-olds, 2 12-year-olds, and we were talking, and a Russian soldier walked up to us and shot one of the boys." And I said, "Horst never told me." And he said, "Well, I'm telling you." But he never talked about it. Why would he? He was 13 years old. He wanted to forget about it. They shot this 12-year-old because he thought he was a Hitler youth. Well, you automatically, when you turn 16, you have to be a Hitler youth. A Boy Scout uniform and a swastika on your arm. And they were looking for his brother. They got the 12-year-old by mistake, and my brother saw this. As we were traveling, when they drove us out from our home to the next town, and the next town, all these people, here 600 people being moved. Then we get to the next town, it's about 1.5 miles. Our towns are close together because we do everything by walking, bicycle, or horse and buggy. So our towns aren't apart like they are here, and they're smaller towns. And the grandparents were, of course, not able to walk. Some of the grandparents, so they were on wagons with the horses. And as they died, they laid them in a ditch, covered them with a blanket or coat, and they couldn't even, families couldn't even tell them goodbye because they were with their guns. Go, go. They were on both sides of us, like on caravan, and they were on both sides of us and just pushing us along. And we saw many babies die. It was cold, it was February, and it was cold. So a lot of babies died, and they had to do the same way. That's how they got buried, just laid them in a ditch. And then you couldn't even tell them goodbye because they were asking you to go, keep going. And that's what I remember, and that's what my brother remembers. He never talked to his children about it. They asked Aunt Mildred, Dad will not tell us anything. We asked him a question and he would change the subject. Why? He was 13 years old. And he didn't want to remember.
So it's very, it's common that those who win wars get to write the history. And as we all know, the Allies won World War II. So what is often taught in history lessons, even to this day, is Germans, all Germans were Nazis. And therefore they were the bad guys of World War II. But your family, and as you talk about in this book, you guys were innocent bystanders. You were victims of what had occurred to you as well. So what do you say to those that make this assumption, and what do you wish was taught in history classes about World War II?
I would love to get my favorite place that I've done many of these, 30 some or so. My favorite place is going into schools. I went into Lions. Karen works at Lions for a lady, and she heard that the Holocaust teacher was reading my book. And Karen says, Mom, I want to buy 25 books and I want to take them to the school when I go to work the next day. So I sent 25 books and we will donate to schools if they will use them. And this is the 7th graders. And after they read the book a year ago this month, on the 7th or 6th of May, I went there to talk to them. I told my Sunday school class, please pray for me. I'm going to talk to 7th graders. Having raised 4 7th graders, I know what they could be like. I could not believe there was a class of 30, 2 classes, 30 in the class. They sat there spellbound. They had such good questions. I couldn't believe. Prayers must have helped, because they were just both classes. And at the end, I got a box of blessings as a gift. It's a little box like playing cards, only a little bigger, with 50 scripture on front. On the back, they all wrote me a note. And here, it just touched my, see, there I go. It just touched my heart, what some of these children said. You inspire me to be better. These are 7th graders. You helped me trust again. You gave me hope. I'm wondering what kind of home life some of those children have. You know, it just touched my heart to read this. God had a purpose for you. And then there were 50 cards, but 60 children. So some of them, there was 2 on a card. They shared the card. You made us cry and smile. And then another one said, I didn't know I could like somebody I never met before. And then afterwards they came around by 8 or 10, we were talking, and one of the little boys said to me, I want to give you a great big hug in front of all these other kids. He wasn't bashful. And I says, and I want to give you a hug too. I just couldn't believe it. To me, this is, and then I went to Phillipsburg and talked to 5th and 6th graders here, about a month ago, Karen? We went to Phillipsburg, and there was 80 5th and 6th graders. And they had good questions. But we were in a gym, it was so big, I couldn't hear them. They were talking so soft, I couldn't hear them. The teacher had written the names, she had a sheet, the name, and then the questions they were going to ask. If I couldn't hear, they were way back there. She was right here, and I look at her, and she would repeat the question so I could answer. The very first, when we started this, a little boy in the back got up and he says, I am so sorry you had to go through this. And it just touched my heart, and I wanted to go over there and give him a big hug. But I didn't dare because it would embarrass him. But I thought that was pretty special in front of all of these kids.
Yeah. And, you know, talking about this, because I think that is, if you read the book, you have that gut reaction that I'm so sorry you and your family had to experience this and go through this. But what strong people your family was, especially your
mother,
his
yes.
Muti, yes, your mother. What a lady! What a lady! The fact that, first off, your papa, you don't know, you know what happened to him, but he was sent to a work camp by the Red Army,
right.
And then your Muti was left with 2 adolescent children in wartime Germany, and she
away from home,
away from your home. And I think one of the saddest parts, and I mentioned this to you, is it's like throughout your story, it's like you guys would get a little bit of hope, and then it would be taken away. And then you go back home, and you were talking about your garden and how you and Horace were so proud of your garden. And before you could even harvest the vegetables, the Red Army shows up at your door and gives you 1 hour to pack your bags and leave.
the Poles.
The Poles do, yes.
Yes.
So can you talk about the damages that occurred to your family farm and the town?
You know, when we went by our farm, when they drove us, they got us out. We at night we were staying in town with families because we lived a quarter of a mile out, and my Mom and Dad didn't think it was safe to be out there by ourselves if the Russians came. So there about 4 or 6 families stayed together in a home. And so as we walked by our home, as in a caravan, they drove us by, there was our police dog. They had him on a chain, and he was just like he was being beaten, and he was on a chain. The cattle were turned loose. But I'm thinking, what happened to the hogs in the stalls? Who's feeding? The Russians, before we were leaving, the Russians were shooting ducks, geese, chickens, and Mother standing there crying. Mother was 46, and my mother was 47, and my dad was 46 at the time when they came. Here is all her hard work, all these animals she raised, and they're just shooting them for the fun of it. And it's a good thing, because who would have fed them? There was nobody to feed them. But I'm wondering what happened to the hogs. I just thought about that after the book was written. Well, what happened? Surely they let them out because they would have starved. They were still in the stalls.
When you came back to the farm, they weren't there.
There was nothing. That was so quiet. There was nothing. Occasionally you heard a bird. That was it. There was nothing. The house was empty. They had piled everybody's belongings on a big old pile, and that's where we had to go and got us some mattresses and things. Our mattresses are just 3-piece things. They're not like a big mattress here. And we found some in that pile, and that's how we started out again. But there 2 months, and then the Poles came. And my mother wasn't feeling good. I think it was mainly stress. There was no doctors, no nurses, and she says, I just don't feel good. And I said to the Poles when they came in, there was 3 or 4 standing there. And they says, you will have to become a Polish citizen. That was 2 months after we got back. Polish citizen, learn to speak Polish, or you have to leave. And my mother, I said, well, my mother is not feeling well, and so so I don't know if we can leave or not. Well, we'll be back tomorrow. And I said, she's not feeling well. And one of the soldiers says, well, I'll just shoot her. Can you imagine somebody telling a then 16 and 13-year-old, we're going to shoot your mother. Of course, he probably was kidding, but to me, he wasn't kidding. That meant my mother and my dad's going to tell my mother then what we're going to do. Excuse me.
So, yeah, you talked about the strength of your mother. And one of the things that your mother also did for you was a few different times she disguised you so that you wouldn't look like a fresh-faced 15-year-old girl. So can you talk about how she disguised you?
Oh, can I? It was horrible. Every day she'd take lard and she kind of heat it a little bit and smear it on my neck. Then she'd take a rag and tie it around my neck, and I could turn my head like this, tight. She'd make me, and I always had rosy cheeks. She put flour and put on my face to make me look sick. And here I am, I'm sitting there, white-faced, and just turned my head like this. I couldn't turn anymore because it was tight. And that's what she intended. And they look at me, soldiers come in and say, she's sick. And then I did it. But that one morning when I had to go to wash, she hadn't fixed me up yet. And they said, you wash, you come. And they loaded us in wagons and took us to another town. Again, I was separated from my family. And I'd never been away from my family, and we had to wash shirts in this laundromat, and we used wooden washboards. And I'm trying to figure if you have a really sharp edge on wood, that's what they were like. In Germany, we have washboards, regular metal washboards, but these were wooden, and they were new, brand new, and the edges were very sharp. But you run your hands down that and miss, if you didn't have the shirt or whatever you had, your skin came off. So after 3 days, and none of us, they never, ever, ever asked our name. They said my dad died in Poland. We don't know, because they never asked our name. They did not know who I was. They line us up in a line and they say, you and you and you wash. They didn't know my name. So if someone died, how did they know who they are? So that's why we said we don't know where my dad died, where he was. We did not know. And so when she pulled me out, she pointed to me, and I said, look at my hands. They're all raw. The skin is off. And I didn't know if I ever see my mother and brother again. My dad was gone. I was hurting. I'd never been away from home. And I don't know if my mother and brother were still alive. They were in another town. And I stepped out of line. It was a Russian lady soldier. I said, look at my hands. They hurt so bad I couldn't sleep all night. It's just like if you had a burn or something. And I'm not going to wash anymore. And I went like this, and I thought at that point I was going to get shot. because they warned us that they were going to shoot us if we refused to work, so the rest of them don't refuse. She pushed me back in a line and took the next girl, but her hands were not much better than mine. She was afraid to speak up. I got to go plant potatoes the rest of the time I was there, and I was so happy because I grew up planting potatoes. So I got to do one. But our meal was potato soup with rancid bacon for breakfast, mashed potatoes and rancid bacon for lunch, and potato soup with rancid bacon and black bread for supper. But you know, and I never liked potato soup. And Mother cooked it with milk. But, and this was just water, like the potatoes you cook thin water. You ate it because you were hungry. And that was our meal.
And you endured that for about a month, a little over a month?
3 weeks.
3 weeks, okay,
3 weeks.
And then, so after those 3 weeks, they just said, okay, you're free to go.
You're free to go.
Okay.
4 of us took off to go. Which direction are we going to go? A lot of it is forest. Where are we? We're in a strange town. How do I know what directions are we going? There was 4 of us girls. Which direction? Well, let's try this way. Well, somehow we got the right directions, the town that they got us from. And the soldiers came out, they said, no civilians in here. They had moved again. Now, where are we going to go? How are we going to find our families? Well, we went another direction, and maybe it was a day or 2. I'm trying to think, did we have anything to eat? I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, somehow we made it to the next town, and there were so many people in this place. They were mulling around. It was a big barren home with maybe 30 rooms. And there was this lady cooking over an outside fire. It was my mother. And she was this far away from me. This lady here in this pretty red dress. This far, she said, Mildred, you're dirty and you got lice. And she was this far away from me. Well, my clothes for 3 weeks, the same clothes I had on when I left, no change of clothes. I was clean from here, from washing, and here. The rest of me was not clean. I had long hair, shoulder-length hair, and I said, I wish they would have cut it off. I would have cried, but at least it would have been easier because all we could do was go like this. And of course, we slept on straw that was about 1 inch long, and there was people there before we got there. They were out a crew, and they get, after 3 weeks, they get another crew. Well, they left the lice, and we sleeping on them, so you start itching. So, of course, I had lice. And Mother said, you go in this little shed over here. There was a little wood shed there, and I will heat some water and get you cleaned up. You go in, stay in there. You can't come in because she knew I'd probably bring lice in for the other people. And she says, there's 30 of us sleeping in one room where we are here. And she got me some water, cleaned me up, some clothes from my brother. And on my head, she put vinegar and put a towel real tight around it. And I says, I can't stand it. It was burning because I had scratched. It was burning and they were running. And she says, you got to keep it on till morning. You can't come in till morning. So I slept in a shed, and then the next morning she combed my hair, got the lice gone, and I was clean. I could go in. And we were there just a short time, and then they told us that we could go back home 1st of May. The war is over. The Germans Germans had been beat, the war was over, and you can go back home. But we come home, we found nothing. Like I said, there was nothing, not a sound of anything. Maybe you hear a bird, and that was really, from a farm. When you were on a farm, you had animals, you hear some noise, something. There was nothing, no cats, no dog. There was nothing. That was pretty sad. Am I getting off of the subject?
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, you're carrying on perfectly. So you all are reunited. You go back to your family farm for a time, and then you find out that you have, first off, if I didn't say this prior, Mildred was born in the United States. So her father and mother came over to the United States, and they ended up going back when Mildred was just an infant because her father had to go back and help at the family farm. So she was born here in the United States. And that kind of gets us to when you found out you could come to the United States. So
Yes.
Can you tell that story?
Well, my dad buried, before the Russians came, we had brick in our basement, bricks. It was laid bricks in the basement. And he buried my birth certificate. They were married in New York. Their marriage certificate, this ring, this ruby ring, this gold necklace is my mother's necklace. She buried it in this bag, and some money, which was no good, of course, it wasn't any good, and a few other things. And when we got back home, she said, I'm going down the basement and see if that bag is there. She came, we went down the basement, and there was this pile of bricks dug up. Here was this great big pile of bricks. And she said, oh no, it was just about right here. She lifted the first brick that they didn't touch. 10 bricks is what something called them away. I think the Lord took care of us right there. It was divine intervention. Because there, the first brick she lifted, there was the bag. Something called them away. Why did they leave 10 bricks when they dug up the whole basement? But something must have called them away, that they couldn't finish what they were looking for, if they were looking for anything.
And so one of those items in the bag was your birth certificate that said you were born in the United States.
Right, I was 6 months old when my folks went back to Germany because my grandmother had died and my grandfather wanted my dad to take over the farm. Well, my dad had been here 8 years and he really didn't want to go back. He was working on a thrashing crew at that time, and they had a good life here. My mother didn't want to go back because she had to wash on a washboard again. Right here she didn't. And so they went back, and of course, you know what happened. They were stuck there. I mean, till the Russians came, of course. Yeah.
So can you describe what it was like when you had to leave your muti and horse to come to the United States?
I did not want to go. She said, in order the mayor got it where we stayed. We asked when they sent us from camp in Berlin, when they sent us to another place, please don't send us to the Russian zone. Send us American, English, French, any place but Russian zone, because we've been through all this with the Russians. Again, we landed in the Russian zone. The mayor of the town that we were in had an order to send 30 girls to Siberia. And he came to my mother and said, I know you're not feeling well yet. And but in the first of the year, I will have to send Mildred. He had to send 30 girls from town to Russia, And in January, there are 20 more going, and she can go in January since you need her help. And Mother got the idea. In order to get a train ticket to Berlin, I had to have an excuse. Why am I going from the mayor? So my mother said, it is getting to be cool weather, and we have warm winter clothes in Berlin. We didn't. There was nothing. I don't know how ever she dreamt all this up, but she said, we have warm winter clothes in Berlin, and I would like for Mildred to go to Berlin to get those winter clothes. And he wrote the excuse. I got a train ticket that gave me the excuse to get the ticket to go to Berlin. I didn't want to go to Berlin by myself. And she took the birth certificate, folded it, pinned it to my bra, and she says, this piece of paper might help you get a job, is what she thought. She did not know that I was an American citizen. Well, I have a German father and a German mother. That's what I told the council. I got this piece of paper when he said, my dear girl, you are an American. I said, well, I have a German father and a German mother. And so my mother didn't know, but she thought I could get a job. I did not. I says, I don't want to go to Berlin. I don't want to go by myself. And she says, you've got to go. Because if I didn't go, I would have been to Siberia, probably never come home again. So I went to Berlin and stayed there until a year or a little more, till I got to come over here. And I did not see my mother and brother for 6 years. I started high school when I was 18, and I graduated when I was 22. But I did it. I knew 3 words of English. When I got off of the ship, I might be getting off a little bit here. When I got off of the ship, somebody said, what did you think of the Statue of Liberty? I looked at that. All I could think of, I got off the ship. I did not know one person on the ship. I'm standing there with my little suitcase, the little suitcase that's over there. That was my suitcase that I came over with. And I stood there and I thought, who is going to help me to get to Great Bend, Kansas to my aunt and uncle? How am I going to get there? I couldn't speak English, and I didn't know one person. It's just like in here. I know a few of you, but that's just how it was. I didn't know anybody on the ship. I didn't know anybody. So,
family friends.
Yes, and then all at once, someone held up a sign, Mildred Schindler, a big sign, and they were friends of the family, and they had come to help me. And I stayed with them for 2 days, and then they put me on a train. Interpreter said, in the morning the dining car will be hung on, and you will go to breakfast. I showed him, the conductor, I showed him my fruit, bananas, oranges. I've never seen oranges before. We didn't have such a thing. We'd get a banana or something like that, but my aunt came from Berlin to help during harvest, but we didn't have anything like that. So,
People you stayed with,
yes, the people I stayed with said, what do you want to get? Well, there was candy bars and nuts and fruit. And I got some of that. And I said to the conductor, this is what I eat. And he went like this, grabbed me by the hand in the next morning and went through 6 cars to the dining car. And excuse me. I'm standing there looking at this. I turned around and he was gone. I couldn't speak and I couldn't write. Now what am I going to do? People are sitting here eating, so I finally sat down, looked at the menu, probably had it upside down, I don't know. Looked at the menu, and my mom and dad would talk English in Germany when they didn't want us to know what they were talking about. And my mother would say in German, go get, and then she would say eggs. Instead eggs, she said eggs. And I looked at that menu and said, eggs. So I wrote down 2 fried eggs. And I thought, I wonder what if they poached or boiled. What am I going to get? When I got my meal, I had toast, I had orange juice, I had 2 fried eggs, and I learned a new word, fried. Fried eggs. And I didn't order orange juice. I wanted a pancake. A man was eating a pancake. I was too scared. I didn't know what it was. If it was today, you know, Mildred would do, she'd walk over there and she says, I want that. But I was too scared right then. That was the only meal I ate in 2 days and 2 nights. Going to Great Bend, I ate my fruits and candy bars and nuts, and I didn't eat any of that later because I didn't want to see any of that anymore. Excuse me.
You made the train trip from New York to Great Bend because you had family here. You had an aunt and an uncle and some great
and a cousin. And a cousin.
So, which we have a lot of people, even in this room, who have German descent because we've always been told that agriculture in Germany is similar to the climate in Kansas. Can you kind of speak of that coming from a agriculture background in Germany and then eventually marrying into a farm family here in Kansas?
Yes. Of course, everything is done with horses and done by hand. Everything when you dig in potatoes. A lot of you have potato forks. We dig potatoes with, well, our potato fork is a potato fork, only it's go like this. And you hit behind the plant and pull it. And that's how we dig potatoes. It's a potato fork, it's like this, and you just
claw.
Yes, and you just.
Germany.
But you better not hit potatoes. I mean, especially nice big one, you ruin it, you know, if you would hit it. So you want to hit it far enough, and you learn that at a very young age. Everything mainly is, and our farms are much, much smaller than here, of course, because everything done by horse and implements, and that was, of course, then. Now they have tractors too, but that was then, so.
Yeah, so that kind of brings you to Kansas, then you have family here, and then you met the love of your life, Leon. And I wanted to point out, to kind of wrap this up so we have a few minutes for Q&A. So this picture on the cover, what I really enjoyed about this book is it is chock full of documents and photographs and all like special family treasures. But this on the cover right here is actually, this is Moody, this is Mildred, this is Leon, her husband, and then this is her brother Horace when they reunited in Hutchinson. So, and at first I was looking at them, I was like, what good looking people. And then you read the story and find out, well, that's Mildred and her husband. So they ended up here in Kansas and then had 4 children. Susan and Karen are 2 of their 4. And you've lived now in Ellsworth for quite some time?
Yes, since 2006 we retired to Ellsworth. Leon thought we needed to be close to, we didn't have a grocery store anymore where we lived, and we needed to be where there was a grocery store and a hospital and a doctor. At our age we thought we better have that be close there, and that's when we moved to Ellsworth, where we are now. So.
But you've lived in Kansas for almost 70 years? About 7 years,
Yes.
I'd say?
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay, well, that kind of concludes. I know I had so many questions for you, but that was wonderful, hearing your story and some explanations of the book and your story in the book. So let's give it up for you.
I want to leave you with this thought. I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand, and I thank God for that. Thank you so much.
I'm going to put the mic stand right here, so if anybody has a question for Mildred, please feel free to come up and speak into the mic so that she can hear.
Yes.
Anyone have a question? Yeah, come on up, bud.
What is that medal on your shirt for?
Oh, I forgot to tell you. I am so honored to get this medal. This comes from the Daughters of the American Revolution.
The National Medal of Honor.
It's the National Medal of Honor. And the chapter in Ellsworth had tried to get this for 80-some years, and they got it here.
I have another question. Did you see an American soldier at all?
Did you see an American soldier while you were in?
Yes, I said, we were walking down the street, and I said, oh, look at that Russian soldier. His uniform looks so nice and clean. She said, that's an American soldier. That's not a Russian. The Russians didn't look very clean. They were fighting troops, and they never looked very clean. And when I saw this American, I didn't know it was an American. I thought it was a Russian, but it was an American. And I was happy to see an American.
And you saw American planes fly over your farm.
My dad says, here comes the Americans. No, not really. They're coming from the wrong direction. It probably was Russians. It was just hoping those were Americans. But and they were going like, woo, woo, woo. They were bombs. They were going to Berlin or some big town. Our small village was not affected by that. We just saw them go over. We just thought that was fun to see them go. And on the way back, they sounded, ooh, they had unloaded their bombs. And we saw them, and we were on a farm, and we had fun playing. We grew up. We didn't know much about the war until the Russians came. Thank you for your question.
Did you ever see a fight?
Did you ever see a fight? Like the soldiers fighting, maybe, like combat?
I think you were driven out by guns, but there was no shooting. You never saw any shooting or fighting among
No,
soldiers.
but I saw a lot of guns. I saw a tank. I saw a tank coming by our place with soldiers lying on the tank with their guns, but they just laid there. They did not, they were fighting troops. They weren't paying any attention to us, but they were just laying there on the tank with guns, and I didn't actually see them shoot, so. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Something that I was always under the impression that, I was always under the impression that it was the Jews that the Germans were after. And actually in your book, you were brought up as a Lutheran, in the Lutheran faith. So they were taking everybody, no matter what their background was. Is that right?
Well, the Germans weren't doing that. The Russians.
The Russians.
Yeah, the Russians. Yeah, the Russians. Yeah. But the Germans did that to the Jews. And we did not, I'm sure my mother and dad knew, but they didn't know either what they did with them. We lived in this small little town, and you go by bicycle to the next town, and no, they didn't probably know either.
You mentioned Dogtown. How far was that from you?
I have no.
You mentioned Dogtown.
I have no idea. I just know because that's around Berlin, I think. I'm not sure.
Well,
it's a long way.
By Munich.
My uncle was in the American Army, and they came upon Dogtown. And being how he was a farm boy and knew how to run a tractor, he helped dig the trenches to bury these piles of bodies that they found. And he lived till he was 95. He never talked about it.
No.
Until just a year or so before his death, and he told his kids about it. And I think my dad knew. My dad had served in the Pacific, and but anyway, yeah. And my husband fought in Vietnam, and he had this quote in his address book about war is hell. Only those that have fought for it know the true flavor of freedom.
Right.
So,
And you know what? Some of the schools says, "Oh, we don't want our children to know, that's too painful." Listen, this is real. This was real for us. We never even thought that such a thing would happen to us. We were just living on a farm, a good life, and we never thought anything like this would happen. Look what's happened to the Ukraine 70-some years later. I see these people walking, this older lady walking. I looked at that and I said, she's not going to get very far because they were helping her. How is she going to walk? She can't. And where are they going to go? Their homes are destroyed. But we were just, they left voluntarily. We were driven out. One town after another, always going east. By gunpoint. Either you go or you don't, you're shot.
yeah.
Does anyone else have a question?
No, I was waving you for.
Hi, Mildred. First, thank you. The question that I have is just a few days ago, I was watching a YouTube video. I forget her name, but she was a Holocaust survivor. She was a Hungarian Jew and talked about under Nazi occupation. One of the things that she really feared and has struggled with to this day was how all of her friends and all of the people around her suddenly turned against her with a lot of the propaganda that the Nazis were promoting towards Jewish people, and how she struggled to understand like how people couldn't give her empathy when she was suffering so much. I know you said as children you didn't really see a whole lot, but did you see or were affected, or did people around you see any of this like propaganda and lies that Hitler was really trying to enforce into people?
Our folks kept us shielded from that. We did not, we didn't even get to listen to the radio. They just turned that on when something came on that they wanted. Otherwise, no, we didn't. We were shielded from that. We didn't know anything.
And how were your parents, like so many like average people? One of the books that I've always wanted to read is called Ordinary Men, about how Hitler turned people, just normal people, against people. How were people like your parents able to really know that these were all lies and being able to?
My dad was here for 8 years in America and then went back, and he didn't believe a word of it. But he couldn't say anything. My mother would always say when he went to meetings, Papa, just don't say anything, because your neighbor could turn you in. Because just like the Nazi that was living in our town, he come in a brown uniform, comes and tells me, little girl, feed the chickens. During the day, I says, I don't feed the chickens till evening, then they come in and go to roost. He says, I want you to do it now. And my dad was so upset. They were working in the field. Here they were telling a young girl, child, what she should do. And they come into the farmyard, and while they were working in the fields, I don't know why I was working out there at the time, but he just told me to feed the chickens. Well, they were coming running from all over the farm because they run all over all day long, you know, our chicken. And all he wanted to do was count the chickens, make sure we were giving enough eggs to the government. That we were, but my mother had chickens locked up in a hog shed and had a hog in a chicken coop. So we could butcher an extra hog, have extra meat
And eggs.
and we had extra eggs. We had to give so many eggs up. Well, what if a chicken died and we wanted some eggs for our own use? So therefore she had chickens hidden. She was a smart lady.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
I wonder if you could tell us what became of your brother. Where did he settle? And how did his life go?
My brother was the happiest person. Both my mother and brother, when they came over here, they loved it. They never became American citizens. They stayed German citizen, and they had to register. Every January, go to the post office and register. But they were so happy. He worked for Harper Construction in Germany. He took a class, wagon wheel maker. Well, you know, that had to be a carpenter. And so he worked for Marlette, and he worked for Harper Construction. He loved his job. Leon taught him how to drive a car. They got a car, they got an apartment, and then they got a house till he got married. And then my mother moved in with my dad's sister, and those two ladies lived together till in the 90s.
Were they in Kansas?
In Kansas, in Great Bend.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I just want to remind everyone that if you have not signed the guest book, please do so Mildred knows who all attended. We have some memorabilia on that table over there. Do you have books for sale?
There are a few, I think.
Okay.
If anybody brought their book,
Okay.
we'll sign.
There are a couple books for sale if you would like to purchase them. And if you bought your own copy, Mildred would be happy to do a signing at that table over there. Mildred, I really appreciate you coming. This was so wonderful and getting to hear your story.
Thank you so much.